The morning sun cast long shadows across the busy street corner in downtown San Diego as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez made his way slowly down the sidewalk. His left leg, still healing from shrapnel wounds received during his third deployment in Afghanistan, moved with a noticeable limp that he tried hard to conceal. The physical therapy sessions were helping, but some days were harder than others. Marcus had been medically discharged from the Marines 6 months ago, and adjusting to civilian life felt like learning to walk all over again. Not just because of his injured leg, but because everything seemed different now. The sounds of traffic replaced the rumble of Humvees, and the smell of car exhaust took the place of desert dust and diesel fuel that had become so familiar during his years overseas. He was heading to another job interview, this time at a small construction company that specialized in residential projects. His resume was strong, filled with leadership experience and technical skills learned during his time in the Corps, but explaining the gap in employment and his medical limitations had become a source of anxiety. Too many potential employers saw his injury as a liability rather than recognizing the dedication and sacrifice it represented. As Marcus approached the intersection near the downtown waterfront, he noticed a small crowd gathering around what appeared to be a memorial ceremony taking place in the nearby park. Several men in military dress uniforms were setting up a display, their movements precise and coordinated. Even from a distance, he could tell these weren't regular military personnel. There was something different about the way they carried themselves, a quiet intensity that spoke of elite training and years of dangerous missions. The ceremony appeared to be in honor of a fallen service member, and Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever he encountered reminders of friends who hadn't made it home. He had lost 3 members of his unit during his last deployment, including his closest friend, Corporal James "Jimmy" Thompson, who had been killed by an improvised explosive device while on patrol in Helmand Province. Marcus tried to focus on his upcoming interview, checking his watch and realizing he still had 20 minutes before his appointment. The construction company office was only a few blocks away, so he decided to take a moment to observe the ceremony from a respectful distance. Something about the solemnity of the gathering drew him in, perhaps because he understood the weight of what they were commemorating. As he moved closer, he could see that the uniformed men were indeed Navy SEALs, their trident insignias catching the sunlight. They were setting up a memorial display for a teammate who had been killed in action overseas. The precision with which they arranged every element of the display spoke to their military training, but there was also something deeply personal about their movements, the careful way they handled photographs and mementos. Marcus found himself thinking about his own struggles with survivor's guilt, the constant questioning of why he had made it home when others hadn't. The therapy sessions at the VA hospital had helped him understand that these feelings were normal. But knowing something intellectually and feeling it emotionally were 2 very different things. A small group of civilians had gathered to watch the ceremony, their faces showing respect and curiosity. Marcus noticed an elderly man wearing a Vietnam veteran's cap standing nearby, his weathered hands folded in front of him as he observed the proceedings. There was something about the man's posture that reminded Marcus of his own grandfather, who had served in Korea but rarely talked about his experiences. The SEALs continued their preparations with methodical precision, each man knowing his role without needing direction. Their leader, a tall man with graying hair at his temples, carefully positioned a framed photograph at the center of the display. Even from where Marcus stood, he could see it was a picture of a young SEAL in his dress uniform, his smile bright and confident. Marcus checked his watch again and realized he should start walking toward his interview. The job was important, not just for the income, but for his sense of purpose. He needed to feel useful again, to contribute something meaningful with his skills and experience. The construction work would be physical, which might be challenging with his leg, but it was honest work that would allow him to build something tangible. As he began to turn away from the ceremony, Marcus heard the sound of a bugle beginning to play taps. The haunting melody stopped him in his tracks, and he instinctively came to attention, his military training taking over despite being in civilian clothes. Around him, other veterans in the small crowd did the same, creating a moment of shared respect and remembrance. The music seemed to carry across the entire downtown area, and Marcus noticed that traffic had slowed as drivers became aware of what was happening. Several people on the sidewalks had stopped walking, standing quietly as the ceremony continued. There was something powerful about this spontaneous show of respect from strangers who understood the significance of the moment. When the bugle finished playing, the SEALs began a ceremonial folding of the American flag that had been draped over a symbolic casket. Their movements were synchronized and precise, each fold executed with the reverence that such a ritual demanded. Marcus had participated in similar ceremonies during his time in the Marines, and watching these elite warriors perform the same traditions brought back memories of both loss and brotherhood. The elderly Vietnam veteran nearby had removed his cap and held it over his heart, tears visible in his eyes. Marcus realized that this ceremony represented something larger than just honoring one fallen SEAL. It was a connection between all who had served, regardless of branch or era, united by their shared commitment to something greater than themselves. As the flag-folding ceremony concluded, Marcus knew he needed to leave for his interview, but something kept him rooted in place. Perhaps it was the sense of brotherhood he felt watching these SEALs honor their teammate, or maybe it was the realization that his own service and sacrifice were part of a larger continuum of American military tradition. The interview would have to wait a few more minutes. Some things were more important than punctuality, and bearing witness to this ceremony felt like both an honor and a responsibility. Marcus straightened his shoulders, ignoring the ache in his leg, and prepared to show his respect in the only way he knew how. The ceremony reached its most solemn moment as the perfectly folded flag was presented to a woman Marcus assumed was the fallen SEAL's mother. She accepted it with trembling hands, her face a mixture of pride and grief that Marcus recognized from too many similar occasions. The lead SEAL, a man who looked to be in his 40s with the weathered face of someone who had seen multiple deployments, knelt beside her chair and spoke words too quiet for Marcus to hear. Marcus felt his throat tighten as memories of his friend Jimmy's funeral flooded back. He remembered holding Jimmy's mother as she sobbed, remembered the weight of the folded flag when it was placed in her hands, remembered the hollow feeling of watching the casket being lowered into the ground. The similarities between that day and this ceremony were overwhelming. As the formal presentation concluded, Marcus noticed that several of the SEALs had spotted him standing at attention during the flag ceremony. Their trained eyes had picked up on his military bearing, the way he held himself despite his obvious injury. One of them, a younger operator with intense blue eyes, nodded slightly in Marcus's direction, a gesture of recognition between warriors. The ceremony was winding down, but Marcus found himself unable to move. His leg was beginning to ache from standing in one position for so long, but he felt compelled to stay until the very end. This wasn't just about respecting the fallen SEAL anymore. It had become about confronting his own unresolved grief and finding some measure of peace with his new reality. As the crowd began to disperse, the lead SEAL approached Marcus with purposeful strides. The man's presence was commanding but not intimidating, and his eyes held the kind of understanding that only came from shared experience in combat zones. "Marine?" the SEAL asked, his voice carrying a slight Southern accent. "Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez recently discharged," Marcus replied, automatically providing his rank and status. "Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan," the SEAL introduced himself, extending his hand. "Afghanistan?" "3 tours. Helmand and Kandahar provinces," Marcus answered, accepting the firm handshake. Master Chief Sullivan's expression grew more serious. "We lost Danny there too," he said, gesturing toward the memorial display. "Second Lieutenant Daniel Kowalski. Kid was only 24, but he was one of the finest operators I've ever worked with. Marcus nodded, understanding the weight behind those words. In the military, praise wasn't given lightly, especially when it came to fallen comrades. When someone was described as one of the finest, it meant they had earned that respect through actions, not just potential. "I'm sorry for your loss, Master Chief," Marcus said. "He looked like a good man." "He was," Sullivan replied. "Saved 6 of us during his last mission. Took fire to give us time to extract a wounded teammate." The Master Chief paused, studying Marcus's face. "You understand that kind of sacrifice?" It wasn't a question, and Marcus realized that Sullivan had somehow read his story in his posture, his bearing, and perhaps the haunted look that never quite left the eyes of those who had seen too much. Combat veterans had a way of recognizing each other, even without uniforms or formal introductions. "We all signed up knowing the risks," Marcus replied, the standard response that never quite captured the complexity of actually living with those risks. "That we did," Sullivan agreed. "But it doesn't make it any easier when the bill comes due." The 2 men stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching as the other SEALs carefully packed away the memorial items. Each piece was handled with reverence, from the photographs to the ceremonial items that had belonged to their fallen teammate. Marcus could see that this wasn't just a job for these men. It was a sacred duty. "You heading somewhere important?" Sullivan asked, noticing Marcus checking his watch again. "Job interview," Marcus admitted. "Construction company a few blocks from here. I'm already running late." Sullivan's expression shifted slightly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of concern in the older man's eyes. "How's the transition been, from active duty to civilian life?" The question was asked with genuine interest, not the polite curiosity that Marcus had grown accustomed to from civilians who couldn't really understand what military service meant. This was one warrior checking on another, and Marcus found himself being more honest than he had been in months. "Harder than I expected," Marcus said. "The injury makes some jobs difficult, and a lot of employers see it as a liability rather than evidence of service." Master Chief Sullivan nodded slowly, his jaw tightening slightly. "That's a damn shame. Some people don't understand what that limp represents." "It's just part of the process," Marcus said, not wanting to sound like he was complaining. "I'll figure it out." "I'm sure you will," Sullivan replied, "but that doesn't mean you should have to do it alone." Before Marcus could ask what he meant, Sullivan reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "I run a private security company when I'm not deploying with the teams. We do contract work for corporations, government facilities, that sort of thing. Always looking for good people with real military experience." Marcus took the card, reading the simple black text that listed Sullivan's name, company, and contact information. "I appreciate this, Master Chief, but I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Sullivan said firmly. "This is recognition of ability and experience. You think I'd risk my company's reputation on someone I didn't think could do the job?" The directness of the statement caught Marcus off guard. He was used to people either pitying his situation or dismissing his capabilities because of his injury. Sullivan was doing neither. "Think about it," Sullivan continued. "We need people who understand discipline, can handle pressure, and know how to work as part of a team. Military experience is valuable, especially for people who've actually been tested under fire." Marcus nodded, pocketing the card. "I'll definitely consider it, Master Chief. Thank you." "Jake," Sullivan corrected. "And thank you for stopping to honor Danny. It means something to us when other service members take the time to pay their respects." As Marcus watched Sullivan rejoin his team, he realized that something fundamental had shifted in his perspective. For months, he had been viewing his military service and injury as obstacles to overcome in his transition to civilian life. But seeing these SEALs honor their fallen teammate and having Sullivan recognize his service as valuable rather than problematic reminded him that his experiences had worth beyond just personal growth. The business card in his pocket felt like more than just a job opportunity. It represented a chance to continue serving in a different capacity, to use his skills and experience in a way that honored both his past service and his future potential. The construction job interview suddenly seemed less critical, though he would still keep the appointment out of professionalism. As the memorial ceremony concluded and the SEALs prepared to leave, Marcus felt a sense of connection that had been missing from his life since leaving the Marines. These men understood the brotherhood that military service created, the bonds forged under pressure that civilian life often failed to replicate. Walking away from the park, Marcus found himself moving with more confidence despite his limp. The chance encounter had reminded him that his service meant something, that his sacrifice had value, and that there were still opportunities to contribute meaningfully to something larger than himself. 3 months later, Marcus stood in the lobby of Sullivan Security Solutions, adjusting his tie as he waited for his first client briefing as the company's newest security consultant. The job interview at the construction company had gone well that day after the memorial ceremony, and they had offered him a position. But after spending a week thinking about Master Chief Sullivan's offer, Marcus had made the difficult decision to pursue the opportunity that would allow him to use his military experience more directly. The transition hadn't been immediate. Sullivan had insisted that Marcus complete a comprehensive training program that covered civilian security protocols, legal requirements, and corporate procedures. Unlike his experience with other potential employers, his injury was viewed as proof of his commitment and ability to perform under pressure rather than a limitation to be accommodated. Marcus had excelled in the training, finding that his military experience translated well to the private security sector. His ability to assess threats, work under pressure, and maintain discipline had impressed both Sullivan and the other team members. More importantly, he was working alongside other veterans who understood his background and valued his contributions. The client they were meeting today was a technology company that had received credible threats against their research facility. Marcus had spent the previous week conducting a security assessment of their premises, identifying vulnerabilities, and developing recommendations for improved protection. It was exactly the kind of work that challenged him intellectually while drawing on his military experience. As he reviewed his notes one final time, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since that morning when he had stumbled upon the SEAL memorial ceremony. The chance encounter had reconnected him with his sense of purpose and reminded him that his service had ongoing value in civilian life. Sullivan emerged from his office accompanied by a woman in an expensive business suit who Marcus recognized as the technology company's chief executive. The Master Chief had aged well in the months since their first meeting, and his success in the private sector was evident in both his confidence and the respect his employees showed him. "Marcus, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen, CEO of Nexus Technologies," Sullivan said, making the introduction. "Sarah, this is Marcus Rodriguez, our newest security consultant. He's the one who conducted the assessment of your facility." Ms. Chen shook Marcus's hand with a firm grip, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "Mr. Rodriguez, I've read your report. Your recommendations are thorough and practical. I'm particularly impressed by your analysis of our perimeter security." "Thank you, ma'am," Marcus replied. "The vulnerabilities we identified are significant but manageable with the right protocols and equipment." As they moved into the conference room, Marcus couldn't help but remember the uncertainty he had felt during those months of job searching. The constant worry about whether his injury would be seen as a disability, the frustration of having his military experience dismissed or misunderstood, the growing doubt about his value in the civilian workforce. Working for Sullivan Security had restored his confidence while providing him with a renewed sense of mission. He was protecting people and facilities, using skills honed during years of military service to solve real-world problems. The work was meaningful in a way that went beyond just earning a paycheck. "Your background is quite impressive," Ms. Chen said as they took their seats around the polished conference table. 3 tours in Afghanistan, multiple commendations, leadership experience. Master Chief Sullivan tells me you were wounded in action. Marcus nodded, no longer feeling the need to minimize or hide his injury. Yes, ma'am. Shrapnel from an IED during my final deployment. But it doesn't impact my ability to perform my duties here. I would imagine it enhances your credibility, Ms. Chen replied. When you assess security threats, you speak from experience about what real violence looks like. Her matter-of-fact acknowledgement of his injury as a professional asset rather than a personal limitation continued the healing process that had begun the day he met Sullivan. Marcus was learning to view his service and sacrifice as credentials rather than obstacles. The briefing proceeded smoothly, with Marcus presenting his security recommendations and fielding questions from both Ms. Chen and her executive team. His suggestions ranged from upgrading physical barriers to implementing new personnel screening procedures, all designed to create multiple layers of protection for the research facility. The key is creating redundancy, Marcus explained, pointing to a diagram of the facility's layout. If someone defeats one security measure, they should immediately encounter another. We want to make unauthorized access as difficult and time-consuming as possible. Sullivan observed the presentation with obvious pride, occasionally adding his own insights, but mostly allowing Marcus to demonstrate his expertise. The Master Chief had become something of a mentor, helping Marcus translate his military skills into the civilian security sector while providing guidance on building a successful career. After the briefing concluded and the clients had left, Sullivan invited Marcus to join him for coffee in his office. The space was decorated with photos from Sullivan's Navy SEAL career, alongside certificates and awards from his business ventures. It was a reminder that successful transition from military to civilian life was possible with the right approach and opportunities. You did well in there, Sullivan said, settling into his chair behind the desk. Ms. Chen was impressed, and that contract could lead to more work with other tech companies. Thank you for the opportunity, Jake, Marcus replied. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure where I'd end up. This work gives me a sense of purpose that I thought I'd lost when I left the Marines. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. You know, that memorial ceremony where we met wasn't just about honoring Danny. It was also about remembering why we serve and finding ways to continue serving even after we leave active duty. The comment resonated with Marcus, who had come to understand that his military service hadn't ended with his medical discharge. It had simply evolved into a different form of service, one that honored both his past experiences and his current capabilities. Danny would have liked you, Sullivan continued. He understood that real strength comes from overcoming challenges, not avoiding them. Your injury tells a story about courage and sacrifice that speaks louder than any resume. As Marcus left the office that evening, he walked past the downtown park where the memorial ceremony had taken place. The area looked different now. Just an ordinary patch of grass where office workers ate lunch and families brought their children to play. But for Marcus, it would always be the place where his new life began. The chance encounter with the SEALs had taught him that respect and recognition had to be earned, not given. Sullivan and his team had shown Marcus that his military experience was valuable precisely because it had been tested under the most challenging circumstances possible. His injury wasn't a sign of weakness or limitation. It was proof of his willingness to sacrifice for something greater than himself. Walking toward his car, Marcus moved with confidence despite his limp. The physical reminder of his service was no longer something to hide or apologize for. It was part of his story, part of what made him effective at his new job, part of what connected him to a brotherhood that extended beyond branch or era of service. The business card that Sullivan had given him months ago was now framed on Marcus's desk at home, not as a memento, but as a reminder that opportunities often appeared when they were least expected. The memorial ceremony that had made him late for a construction job interview had ultimately led him to work that utilized his full range of skills and experiences. Marcus understood now that the transition from military to civilian life wasn't about leaving his service behind. It was about finding new ways to contribute, new missions to accomplish, and new ways to honor the memory of those who hadn't made it home. Every security assessment he completed, every threat he helped neutralize, every client he protected was a continuation of the oath he had taken as a Marine. The wounded Marine who had passed by a SEAL memorial ceremony had discovered that true respect wasn't just about honoring the fallen. It was about living in a way that honored their sacrifice by continuing to serve, continuing to contribute, and continuing to embody the values that had defined their service. The SEALs had shown him that brotherhood extended beyond unit boundaries, and that recognition of worth sometimes came from the most unexpected sources.